consider and possibly vote on modifications to the city manager's employment agreement. The city manager is with us now. I mean, before we go into executive session, do we wish to have the city manager sit with us, or would it be more appropriate to have the discussion without the city manager? Obviously, she knows what's in here. She's been working with the solicitor on the contract, whatnot, but before we actually go into, or I ask for a motion to go into executive session.
And if you wanted to join for a part of the executive session and then at some point dismiss her, you can do that as well. So just to be clear.
I have two comments on that. You know, I actually think that we should discuss it among the executive committee and without the city manager, but I don't feel strongly one way or another on that. I do feel pretty strongly about why we would be going into an executive session to discuss this. We're not talking about performance or anything else. We're talking about a general city manager contract, is my understanding, that this is a public servant, and I'm not quite sure why this would need to be addressed. I just need you to explain to me before we take a vote on executive session as to why we would go into executive session. If it was performance-based, I would totally agree that it should be.
I agree completely.
I don't see where FOIA covers this.
If nobody's going to want to have a discussion about anything performance-based as to why these small modifications should be made to her contract or not made, then it's appropriate to do it in the open public session.
And in the same way, I'd go back and what I said, if it is public, then of course the city manager should be here, because I don't see where this is a performance-based discussion at all. It's about a contract. I mean, that's my take. I just wanted to present that first.
I don't have a strong feeling about it one way or another.
Yeah. All right, so we can just move right into it.
I think so, but I'll be careful that if we get into an area where it does seem like it's more appropriate for executive session, I'll ask you to stop and consider moving into executive session.
So let me just be clear.
Yeah.
We want to have a very straightforward conversation about just the contract modification.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly. That's all it is.
Okay.
All right, then we will move forward. And
I'm sorry, is there anything else that would cause it to meet the FOIA allowable for going into an executive session other than performance? I mean, that's the only thing I can see, and I can't see where this is at all about performance.
Yeah, no, I don't know of another, unless somebody else can think of something, correct me, I don't know of another FOIA exception that would permit you to go into executive session to discuss the contents of an employment agreement.
Okay.
I'd just like to ask a question before we get into this. You know, the last activity we did was a evaluation of the city manager. The outcome of that, I believe, was that the mayor was going to talk with the city. Did you do anything in writing? Because I think it needs to be in writing.
Basically, all the information that she and I discussed is Lois has it in the city manager's file. So it's in writing the things that we talked about, which was the compilation of that report that had the statistics on it, as well as the suggestions of the commissioners.
Did we get a copy of that?
No, but we can get a copy of it, no problem whatsoever.
And
that's in her file.
I'm sorry, Stan.
But it was all the information that we talked about.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure something's written down, because I think protocol dictates that you have to have something written, not just oral.
Yep.
And in addition to the contract, I think, well, it doesn't say this on here, but I see you included the city manager goals that you did send out, Mayor. I don't see where, well, A, it's not on the agenda, so I'm not quite sure we can discuss it, but B, even if we do discuss it, I don't see where goals and objectives that don't outline performance would be subject to executive session. Like, I think we can discuss goals in open,
I just
in public.
included it because I had sent those out last week. They were included in the agenda. I don't know so much for discussion, but I think that's up to the commissioners. Because this is more the discussion of the modifications on the contract, whereas the goals were sent out that the city manager submitted to me to have any suggestions that the commissioners may have, whether it's in the meeting itself or offline.
Yeah, I don't see them relevant to this particular conversation. I think this particular conversation is strictly the content of the contract.
Well, and that's why I just asked earlier if we were going to have a straightforward conversation about the contract, and we're already drifting
Right.
into discussion about just why we have this. So maybe we could just stay focused on what's noticed.
So if we can, the agreement is 3 pages into your packet.
Yeah.
Or 4 pages into your packet.
Okay.
And starting with page 1, the only thing that changed in page 1 is all the things like, this was the original contract that got modified. So where we say the city manager, the city would like to employ, and that's now just changed to the city employs. I'm sorry, do you have it?
Keep going. There you go.
The problem I have is I print out a copy so I can make all my notations on it, and then I get a different copy with, but I think I can coordinate. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, so as I was saying, on page 1, the only thing that I can recall changed, there's 2 things. The one thing that changed is the contract, this is the original contract from when she was originally employed, so it says the city would like to employ. Well, now she's employed, so now it says the city employs. The other thing that changed is, if you look down at section 1.3 at the bottom of page 1 of 8, city manager is expected to attend to her duties and responsibilities during the regular work week of the city and to be available during normal business hours of the city as well as hours outside of normal business hours, including Saturday mornings during the summer season. That's kind of a holdover. The city manager has not been coming in on Saturdays for some time now. It has not created any disruptions in availability or needs from the citizenry that I'm aware of. So that's been the case for some time. A lot of what you'll see going through this is more of an update to our contract of what's actually now occurring. There's one change I'll talk about in a moment. Section 2.1, this agreement shall become effective at 12:01 a.m. on January 6, 2014. That's the old dates. We just take it out because he's already effective. The contract is effective.
So what are you inserting there instead of the question mark? Just continues to be effective?
I should just say this agreement, it really should just say shall be reviewed annually.
Reviewed annually.
Sorry, that should have been an entire takeout.
Cross out become effective.
This agreement
and
continues effective and,
This should be, this agreement shall be reviewed annually.
Right.
Right.
On page 3, you get to the base salary. 120 was the original base salary. You see the number that is there now. That's the number she's currently at. She gets the same increases that the civilian employees get. I think there is an opportunity for you all to give an additional increase if you want to annually, but that number is reflective of what her current base salary is. If you authorize this agreement, you're not authorizing an additional increase.
well, this includes the raise that we offered at the last meeting, right? A
Right.
raise and a
2%.
bonus added together.
The bonus is not in here.
The bonus was.
This is the salary.
Bonus was an
Separate, yeah.
addendum, okay.
This is the base salary.
That's right.
So we're up to date with the 135.
Section 3.2 is deferred compensation. Before the city manager came here, we talked about adopting this 457B plan. That's been adopted, so now we're just removing that section from the
Already adopted.
Yeah. Section 4, city manager shall accrue, 120 is changing to 160 hours of vacation annually, but I think I put in an email to all of you that is currently what she's receiving. If you see that second line is now taken out, after 2 years of employment, the city shall consider increasing. That was considered and it was increased to 160 some time ago.
Where's that? Which one was that? I'm sorry.
That's the bottom of page 3 in section 4.1. So that's another one that's just making the contract define what's actually
Oh,
already been
okay.
implemented.
So right now, the city manager position does get 160
Yes.
hours. Gotcha, I see. Thank you.
Sure. So, and then on page 4, this is more, she'll be credited with certain hours of vacation upon starting employment. She was, so that's already, doesn't need to be in the contract anymore. On October 1, 2014, she was going to be accredited with additional vacation, which that's already occurred as well, so that's coming out of the contract. At the bottom of page 5 of 8, talks about moving and relocation expenses. Again, that's already occurred, so we can delete that from the contract. Page 6 of 8 is severance pay, and this is the one change that is something that you should be aware of. The city charter currently requires this Board of Commissioners, the city, to provide 3 months of severance pay. This revised one would do the 3 months, but in addition, would provide for 9 additional months. So it'd be 12 total months of severance. That's consistent. I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but I know it's consistent with Lewis, for example. In fact, Lewis may do a little bit better than that. It's just something that's not uncommon, in my view, for executive positions. Go ahead.
I have to disagree with you because I looked at the compensation comparisons from I think 20 cities or so across Delaware. And just, as a data point, the average salary within Delaware is $95K a year, and the average severance is 4 months. 4 months severance. In addition to that, in terms of best practices, so for example, IPMA, HR Association, they basically put out as the standard for executives, so I would put our city manager in an executive level position, is 1 month for every year worked, not to exceed 12 months. So to me, do we want to, so in 2 areas, we're out of sync with basically our state, and then secondly, with best practices, if we jump right from 3 to 12 months in terms of severance. And I think you run a best practice organization by adopting best practices and comparables. And so again, the comparables for our state, the average is 4 month severance. And even if you wanted to do better than that, which, I'd rather adopt a best practice, that's 1 month for every year worked up to a certain time period. So I would just like us to consider, do we just randomly pick something, or do we use a best practice and comps to put in place for our contract?
You mentioned the average severance of 4 months. What is the range?
It goes from, let's see, Seaford is 15 months down to Millville 0. There's actually a lot of the cities have 0 months, according to what I've seen, according to this comp study that was done.
Which comp study are you talking about?
I'm talking about the data that you guys gave out at our last executive session. It was the city manager salary and benefits survey that was taken in May.
About the severance, it's respondent skipped the question, and I think you're taking those as
No,
0.
they're 2 different questions. So there was, question 5 is, are you provided? Question 6, what is the length? So I think some people answered the length as how long is your service versus your severance. That's what it looks like to me. So I used the were you provided. If they said yes, then I used the length just to summarize this data. And again, this has absolutely nothing to do with performance. This has to do with how we want to govern our city policies. And to me, it's about using a best practice versus just something that isn't a best practice.
I disagree that this isn't. I disagree that this is just something. The city manager's been here for 5 years. I think, obviously, we've given her the raises that she deserves. I think coming in at 3 months, I don't know anybody in any kind of executive position that doesn't have at least 12 months of severance.
Well, not in a city. I mean, look at the data, Mayor. It's not. I'm not
no,
making this up. This is data.
And I'm looking at the cities and having the work that has to be done in this city versus these other cities, I think it's just not comparable.
But the best practice is 1 month for every year worked. So across the board for executives, executive public servants.
I mean,
So-
everybody's got a differential in their perspective on what's best practices.
Well, this is a best practice from an HR institution or organization. Every one that I read, every one, I haven't seen any deviation. In fact, a lot of them recommend 1 week, for every year worked. So I'm going with the highest standard, which is 1 month for every year worked, not to exceed, say 12 months. So not sure why we would use a different standard. I'm just not. So 2 different standards, both a best practice, industry best practice, as well as comparables to our own state. We're using neither of those criteria. We're just making up our own criteria. I just, look, that's just I'm one person, and I'm basing this on data, period. So.
I would ask Commissioner Schlosser if you looked at the ICMA website.
Yeah, I looked at something called, it's IPMA, which is the Professional Management Association, and every other one that I saw. But please tell me what ICMA, it's open. I'm open to other
Inner City County
standards.
Managers Association website is
Okay.
the standard for professionals.
Okay. And what's that say?
And
What-
they
what does that
actually
say?
do, well, I don't, they actually do surveys on an annual basis regarding all positions in local government, from the top to the bottom. And I don't know what the consensus is and offhand, but it is on their on their city website. And they actually divide municipalities based on population and services that are provided. I think the 23 or 24 survey responses that you received from the City Managers Association of Delaware, was not a widespread, it goes out to a widespread audience, everyone in Delaware, but not everyone in Delaware responded. Most of the responses here, I think you'll find, are in Sussex County, and they are municipalities that are not in sync, if you will, with the city of Rehoboth Beach. I think the ones that are closest are the municipalities of Seaford, Milford, Lewis to some extent, but certainly the city of Rehoboth Beach is largest, not necessarily on size, but services that are provided and functionality.
So Milford's 9 months severance. What was the other ones you mentioned? Seaford's 15 months. And I think you mentioned Lewis. Lewis, 12.
Well, to me, we've got a city manager who has not failed us yet, in my opinion, in 5 years. So this is a termination and severance pay clause that I would be very surprised if it was ever utilized. And if anything even went in that direction, I would think there would be a response from our city manager, who's proven herself to be part of our team, that would overwhelm any issues that might ever arise. So to me, a 12-month change to this is quite reasonable. I mean, we can sit here and squabble about it,
I
but
don't have a strong feeling about the termination policy where we sit right now with this city manager. It will probably never be exercised. I'm not concerned about that. I am concerned about the idea that, you take an average salary of the towns and cities within the state of Delaware, because I think you're comparing apples and oranges. I think you have to look at what we do provide in terms of services. The challenge that someone faces from, off-season staff to then we are full-blown during the summer months with all kinds of issues, and police department that she is in charge of as well. So I'm perfectly comfortable with the base salary for that
By the way,
reason.
I'm not debating the salary. We already voted on that and approved that. I just put that out there as it was one of the data points, so.
Yeah, for me,
I'm
it's not
only
a
talking about
relevant
the-
data point.
Pardon me?
To me, it's not a relevant
Well,
data
we
point.
can agree to disagree, but
Yeah,
nonetheless.
but I'm just saying, I'm just giving my
so-
opinion on that. Since you brought it up, I wanted to say that as well.
Yeah, I'm only talking about the severance model. So, personally,
Well, H&R's my weak link here, but I'm curious for the next city manager. Are we bound by any of this? Or,
the
you know,
next
it would all be negotiable, right? The salary, the terms, the severance, the.
I mean, I'm
retirement.
sure we'd pick this document up as a starting
yeah,
point, but
okay.
it's all negotiable. That's
I
right.
mean, you could feel differently about a city manager that'd been with you 18 months. You know, if things had gone south.
Sure.
Than you do with a city manager that's already completed 60 months of service.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
this is just an update on the contract that was started 60-plus months ago. And so it would only be relevant for this individual. You know, yes, we could use it as a base case as we go forward if, we were to hire somebody new, but I'm sure that would start from scratch.
So if the consensus is leave it 12 months, or as proposed, how do we, Glenn, do we need to address Sharon's comment?
I'm sorry, to address Sharon's.
Comment? Do you have?
No, I mean, that was my response, what I explained at the outset of this portion of it. The charter requires you to adhere, it requires you to give 3 months severance. A city council or a board of commissioners can always do more than what's required, but you're required to do 3.
Okay. So that's a nothing.
And the only other changes on page 7 of 8 is her address now. I was going to say it, but I said, I guess the internet's going, so maybe I won't. And that is it for changes to the employment agreement.
Any,
This last little bit of discussion was helpful for me, not having really gone through this before, and that is that, I view it as situational. It's about this specific city manager at this time in history, and so I'm certainly supportive of this document as presented here.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I guess the only thing that just to kind of keep in for consideration at the time that Sharon is you're no longer the city manager here, I would be interested in having some other revisit of severance, because I like what Commissioner Schlosser said. My experience in the years that I worked was that severance packages were based on the years of service, and whether it was a week or a month for each completed year of service would be something that I think we might want to consider.
So it's
But
clear-
not in this case, not in this
It's clear
case.
that we're not bound by this
Right.
document. It's
future.
only for this.
well, you will be.
specific
I mean,
situation.
anybody that comes in, any candidate comes in would ask for the current agreement and then want the same type of agreement. I mean, that's what I would do, and that's your starting point, so.
Everyone's
You're
gonna
not bound to
negotiate,
Yeah.
them.
but we're not
Yeah.
legally
So
bound.
again, I want to make it absolutely clear, my comments have nothing to do with the city manager's performance. They have to do with how we run this city and govern our policies. And, again, we're just basing this decision on, not on best practices. We're basing it on how everybody feels.
But I know, I don't
I
think
just
it's...
really have a problem with doing it that way. You're either a high-performing organization and you adopt best practices, or you just do ad hoc decisions, and that's where we are right now. And that's all I want to say. I'm sorry. Thank you for listening.
I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that there's all kinds of benchmarks that are used in this, and I think one that would be more relevant would be one that would also look at other city managers. So I think that type of a benchmark would be more relevant than just a executive,
And we
general
did look at
executive.
other city managers across Delaware, and nobody has the package that this city's putting in place. So we're adopting based on just our personal feelings, not a best practice. That's, I know, we have consensus, it is what it is, and I'll support it if that's what everybody else does, but that's my take on it.
With that in mind, we should have a motion. Can I get a motion and a second to approve the changes as amended in the city manager's contract?
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the amended changes on the city manager's contract. Any further discussion? Not, I'll go down by
We're gonna change,
by,
we're gonna make sure the date is August 5th on the document.
I'll go down by Commissioner Sheffer,
Aye.
Commissioner Kaluzzi,
Aye.
Commissioner Mills,
Aye.
Commissioner Schlosser,
No.
Commissioner Sharp,
Aye.
Commissioner Byrne,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. If there's nothing else, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.